I was reading about a little boy who was watching his mother put on her, she was putting on some cold cream. She was makeup. Is that what you mean? I wasn't going to call it that, but if you choose to call it that, we'll call it makeup. She was putting it all on, and the little boy was standing there and looked at her, and as children do, asked questions and said, "Mom, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?" She says, "Well, I'm putting this on to be beautiful." And the little boy said, "Okay, fine," and went away. And when he came back a few minutes later, she's rubbing it all off. To which the boy says, "What's the matter, Mom? You give up already?" Oh, I know. I'll get emails on that one. I know it. Now, we laugh because we can understand how a child might think that and might, get things turned around in that way. We laugh in some respects because we're all keenly aware of how much money we spend in this society on trying to stay young and beautiful. $85 billion is invested in that industry, and by 2013 it will be $115 billion, so that we can be beautiful. And yet we all know, and this day reminds us when we talk about Mother's Day and what all of that kind of symbolizes and stands for, that the true ideals associated with this day cannot be bought or sold. They cannot be marketed at all. I mean, we can try to market being beautiful, but it's not something you really can buy or sell. Because beauty, at its most significant level, is not about how we look. It is about how we act. It's not about our outward appearance. It is about our spiritual inward illumination. It's not necessarily even something tied to our gender, but it is something definitely tethered to our souls. I mean, we have all had those people in our lives, regardless of biological connection or not, male or female, who have mothered us. That is, they have taught us to care. They've taught us to be compassionate and empathetic. They've taught us how to be firm and yet gentle and forgiving. People who did not give us birth, but contributed to making us who we are. And it is the beauty of those things and those people, that we recognize, raise up, and should celebrate today. I mean, we call it Mother's Day, but it's about a whole lot more, is it not, than just that. Because I believe that most people, most of us, were not born acting considerate and loving and forgiving. I don't think those are basic human characteristics. I don't think that. I think Darwin got it right. I think most of us were born with the survival of the fittest. That if we're put on an island, the Lord of the Flies plays itself out really, really quick. You know, that people go for those basic human necessities that help us to live. But yet, somewhere along the line, we got those other characteristics. Somewhere along the line, somebody taught us there was some other way to live, as difficult as that might be and as challenging as that always is. Somebody taught us that. Somebody nurtured, comforted, and supported us, and we learned those things. And I think, and remember the society in which Timothy and the Apostle Paul lived. This is a very, very violent society. It's a very powerful society. It is a very, male-oriented in all those big, strong kind of way. And when Paul writes to Timothy, he says, remember, you are who you are. And he doesn't mention the dads. That's kind of interesting to me in that day and age. He doesn't mention, he says, remember, Timothy, you are who you are. The best qualities that I admire in you came from your grandmother and your mother, and now they've been passed on to you. Timothy's love of God and his love of nature, remember, Paul couldn't be talking, Paul's scientific knowledge was not what ours is. Paul isn't saying you got certain things from your grandmother and your mother through genetics. He's talking about you got it through their spirituality. They taught you love of God, love of nature. Those were not things that just happened. You weren't born doing that. I mean, do you remember the first time when you had kids and you brought the second sibling into the household and the older one just walked over and whacked him on the head? When my oldest daughter was born, after about 3 days, my son said to me, "You can take her back now." Those aren't, those characteristics. I really don't think those are things that we are born with. We learn them. We learn them through the living and the learning of those in whose care we were reared. Or not. And if there's a challenge that our society faces today, I think that we don't take seriously enough the significance of what we do contribute. All of us contribute, not just nuclear families, but all of us contribute to the growth and development of our children. I think, in fact, that many children probably spend more time with recreational coaches or dance or gymnastic instructors or other people than they probably do with their families. Even when family vacations are planned, locations are selected and based on how adults and children can be entertained, and usually separately. And we all struggle. Every family struggles these days with finding mealtime together, right? But it always amazes me when I see families going out to eat, which obviously means they didn't have time to do it at home. I mean, there was something else going on. And then they set a DVD player in front of a child. No communication, no interaction at all. Just kind of exhausted existence. Families, parenting, mothering, fathering. They don't just happen. And if it's not enough, then we set them in front of a television where violence is the preeminent model for problem solving. Think about it. You watch TV, how are most problems solved on TV? By getting a bigger gun or club. And then we wonder why behaviors are the way they are. Some of my fondest childhood memories were car trips. Do you ever take car trips anymore? Do you remember taking car trips? My family would probably have been arrested by today's laws because I can remember car trips, and we're spaced apart. My brothers and I are all a number of years apart, but I can remember a car trip where I slept on the floor, my brother slept on the seat, my oldest brother slept in the back window. You could go to jail for that these days. But I remember that on those car trips, my dad was always about the destination, my mom was about the journey. My dad was always about getting there. If you had to use the restroom, you better be able to do that on the fly because my dad would just breeze by everything. I remember a particular trip in which we lived in western Nebraska, we were going to go to the Grand Canyon. My dad just all of a sudden says we're going to go to the Grand Canyon via Juarez, Mexico. Like in 3 days. Now, you think I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not, because when we got to the edge of the Grand Canyon, we looked over it. My dad said, "You've seen it, let's go." Do you have some of that in your family? I mean, that's truly the way I remember the Grand Canyon. You've seen it now. Okay, what's the big deal? We're gone. We're out of here. You see? But things were different with my mother because Mom was the one who entertained us. She was the one who came up with the license plate games. She was the one who brought books and coloring things for us to read. She's the one who, when my brothers and I fought, she mediated. She was the one when we needed to use the restroom, had the power to get my father to stop. And through it all, we were taught, at least she tried to teach us, how to interact, how to live in community. Do you hear me? We don't know how to live in community anymore. And it all starts there. I recently learned that the base genome, the DNA for all of us, everybody, all human beings, did you know this? That all of us, at the foundation of who we are 99.9% the same. Did you know that? The blueprint for life is 99.9% the same. There is only 0.1% of us, each of you, that is different from anybody else. Which, if I take that to a bigger level, what I want to say to you is that the world does a pretty good job of attempting to clone our goals in the same way. In other words, the world would teach us and play upon that 99.9% of us, it's all the same. That we all want the same things. That we're all climbing to get it, trying to grab it, running to get ahead of someone else. The house, the job, all that stuff. 99.9% the same. And right or wrong, it exhausts us. It doesn't feed us. But what does and what can make a difference that we so easily overlook and forget is that 0.1% that is ours, that we choose, that we receive from others and pass on or not. Spiritual attributes that are so well represented idealistically today. Wrapped up in that understanding of nurture and care and compassion attributed to a mom. And it is upon that 0.1% that we as mothers, as parents, as dads, as caring adults, as the church need to focus on today. Truly. 0.1%. You see how easily it gets lost. Remember what the Apostle Paul says in the 13th chapter of Corinthians? I read that. He says in that chapter, he says, you can play all the trumpets in the world. There he is, he's out there. You can play all the trumpets in the world. You can crash cymbals. You can sacrifice everything you own, but if you don't have that 0.1%, which is love, you got nothing. You got nothing. Was Joe Montana, I remember, who said when he retired, you know, where else do you go? Big football player, for those of you who don't know. He said, where else do you go and hear 80,000 people chant your name? But what do you got when it's gone? If you don't have that 0.1%, you got nothing. A couple was driving across the country, and big move, Florida to California, so they decided to drive both their cars. The 8-year-old son, Nathan, was very worried. He says, what happens if we get separated? What happens if mom's driving and she loses you, and dad, you know you always drive faster? What happens? The dad assured him, he says, well, we'll drive slowly and we'll just kind of follow each other. And the boy kept persistent. He said, you know, he's one of those childs, got to have an answer. What happens if we get separated? And then doing what dads always do, he says, well, then I guess we'll never see each other again. To which the boy responded, then I'm riding with mom. Okay. Point. Today, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever role you play in the family, take a ride with mom. At least in spirit. Remember those characteristics, that 0.1% that separate us from the world. That truly make a difference, that definitely matter. That only continue to live if we are committed to making them live generation to generation to generation. For if we do that, then this day will be one to truly celebrate truly what matters. There's no more. Amen.